For years, whispers circled the palace walls, but now King Charles is done with silence. In a chilling confrontation that shattered centuries of royal protocol, the king himself exposes the palace's darkest lies. What he revealed inside Buckingham's private chambers left senior aides trembling, and his son, Prince William, standing at a fateful crossroads. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a change, subtle at first, just a flicker, in the king's public demeanor. Appearances became brief, smiles tighter, eyes more distant. The charming, diplomatic monarch the world had come to recognize slowly receded, replaced by a man cloaked in contemplation. Insiders whispered of late-night pacing in Clarence House, of private meetings held behind doors so thick with secrecy that not even the most seasoned aides dared interrupt. But the silence wasn't passive. Behind that carefully guarded facade, something had snapped within Charles. Decades of complicity, of orchestrated narratives and selective truths, had finally reached a boiling point. This was not the king Britain thought it knew. This was a man who had reached his limit. The first real sign came in the form of an untraceable leak, a single phrase mentioned in the corridors of Whitehall, then amplified through a growing ripple of rumours, unredacted truth. No one knew where it started, but once the phrase appeared, its impact was seismic. A memo, allegedly penned by Charles himself, was said to contain detailed accounts of cover-ups, false briefings, and orchestrated manipulation spanning generations. The palace scrambled to dismiss it, labeling it fiction. But the damage was done. The words had been released into the bloodstream of the monarchy, and they could not be taken back. In the days that followed, Queen Camilla reportedly urged Charles to walk it back. She, ever the strategist, warned that breaking the silence could unravel everything they had worked to build: image, order, loyalty. But Charles refused. Those closest to him described a man not unhinged but resolved. Emotional, yes, but clear-eyed. He would no longer play the role of a symbolic king. He would be the voice the monarchy had long suppressed. Without fanfare or formal summons, Charles called an emergency meeting. No press releases, no agenda. Just a quiet message sent to a select few, senior advisors, 3 long-standing aides and William. The room was heavy even before they entered. Buckingham, for all its grandeur, seemed to shrink around them as the weight of what was about to unfold grew unbearable. Charles stood at the center, his face pale but resolute. In his hands, a sealed dossier, leather-bound, aged at the edges, its contents unknown to everyone but him. His fingers trembled slightly as he placed it on the polished table, and in the silence that followed, he uttered the words that would haunt the crown. "You deserve to know what they've hidden from you, all of you." As the pages began to turn, eyes widened and gasps were swallowed. The air grew dense with disbelief. Charles's voice, once regal and reserved, cracked with emotion as he read aloud selected pieces, fragments of lies, manufactured scandals, buried truths. But no reaction was more telling than William's. His face, usually unreadable behind royal training, revealed something raw and broken. As the truth unfurled in front of him, the future king's composure fractured. Betrayal seeped into his bones. What he had believed was duty now felt like deception. And in that moment, a storm far greater than any royal scandal had begun to take form, not outside the palace but within its very walls. But the lies Charles exposed were just the beginning. What William would uncover next would fracture everything he thought he knew about the crown and his future as king. Buried beneath years of tradition and carefully curated media headlines, a classified dossier compiled by King Charles reveals a palace conspiracy decades in the making. Pages soaked in betrayal, detailing the manipulation, suppression and destruction of royal truths, all kept from the future king. Until now, the room had fallen silent, but the weight of what Charles revealed echoed louder than any spoken word. As William stood frozen, his gaze locked on the thick, weathered pages before him, the reality of it all began to take shape. This wasn't just a collection of scattered notes or speculative claims, it was a carefully constructed, deeply personal archive of truth. For years, Charles had been gathering fragments, handwritten letters intercepted and hidden, classified security transcripts smuggled OU. Tea from inner chambers, recordings of private conversations never meant to see daylight. Each document bore the scars of silence, of time, of cover-up. And together, they formed a single damning narrative. The palace had become a fortress of lies, and everyone, especially William, had been a pawn in its game. Charles's voice, trembling yet firm, broke through the air like a dagger. He turned the pages with a quiet reverence, exposing one lie at a time. There, underlined in red ink, was a press briefing from years ago, one that had been issued under Queen Elizabeth's name. The briefing, which had once seemed like a carefully measured response to internal family tensions, had in fact been forged, its language manipulated, its intent poisoned. It had not come from the late Queen at all. Instead, it had been constructed by a team of palace operatives to shield key players and redirect blame. And the fallout? It had fallen squarely on the heads of those least prepared to handle it: Harry, Anne, Meghan. William's hands clenched as Charles read on. A detailed account emerged of how fabricated scandals were pinned on his brother and sister-in-law, not for error or misjudgment, but to protect others within the institution. Charles didn't name names yet, but the implications were clear. There were people inside the palace who had weaponized gossip, destroyed reputations, and built walls of illusion around the royal narrative. The press wasn't simply reporting stories, they were co-authors of the monarchy's fiction. And then came the twist that shattered William's composure. According to the dossier, the manipulation didn't stop at Harry, it reached deep into William's own legacy. Speeches he never gave, policies he never approved, statements issued in his name that twisted his image into something palatable, predictable, controllable. Even charitable initiatives he believed in had been redirected to serve optics over impact. The heir to the throne, molded not by choice but by strategy. His history rewritten not by truth but by necessity. Charles, holding back tears, turned to his son and said the words that would never leave William's mind. "They did it to you too, William." It was not an apology. It was a revelation, a breaking of chains, a father admitting not just complicity but pain. And in that moment, the divide between monarch and man evaporated. All that remained were two individuals, victims of the same machine, trying to salvage what was left of their dignity. And while William reeled from this betrayal, one question screamed louder than the rest. Who orchestrated this deceit, and why now? The crown is only as strong as those who protect it. But what happens when the protectors become the deceivers? Behind closed doors, a hidden council of advisors, press liaisons and aristocrats worked in shadows, puppeteering the monarchy's image and even manipulating the king himself. The deeper William read into the dossier, the more the illusion unraveled. What had seemed like a tangled web of isolated betrayals now emerged as something far more orchestrated, deliberate, strategic, chilling. King Charles spoke a name, quiet yet weighted with years of buried fury: the Circle. This was no official body, no recorded committee. It was an unofficial cabal, deeply embedded in the palace, surviving reigns, reshaping legacies, and vanishing into the backdrop of royal tradition. These weren't mere advisors, they were the engineers of perception. Their role wasn't to serve, but to steer. Their loyalty wasn't to any monarch, but to the monarchy as an institution, one they believed should outlive truth itself. The Circle thrived in shadows, mastering the manipulation of royal optics, crafting narratives in times of crisis, and deciding who among the royals would rise or fall. It wasn't just Harry and Meghan they turned into villains. Charles revealed with shaking hands that even Diana, in the final years of her life, had been the target of carefully coordinated image sabotage. Headlines, interviews, staged leaks, all engineered to paint her as unstable, emotional, unfit. It was history repeating itself, again and again, as Meghan became the new vessel for public vilification, the sacrificial offering to sustain the facade of unity and decorum. But perhaps the most agonizing detail was not about who had been tarnished, but who had been groomed. William. The Circle hadn't just protected him, they had curated him. From his earliest engagements to his press persona, from which events he attended to which words he never said, every aspect of his public life had been designed to shape not a leader, but a symbol, controlled, predictable, Harmless, a king in name only. Charles, for all his faults, had come to see it too late. But now William stared directly into the eyes of the machine that had carved his destiny without consent. And then came the moment that cracked the stillness. One of the Circle's senior operatives, a man who had served the palace longer than William had been alive, stood silently in the corner of the chamber. William, breathing heavy with disbelief, turned to him. There were no courtesies, no filters, just rage, demands, betrayal erupting after a lifetime of enforced calm. "How long have I been your puppet?" The man, unshaken, offered no apology, only an unsettling answer. "Since the day the crown chose you." Charles didn't speak. He couldn't. The room throbbed with unspoken truths. And as William stepped back, he saw everything for what it truly was. The crown had become a costume, the throne, a stage, and the Circle, those faceless architects of power, had almost succeeded in creating a monarch without agency. But William wasn't going to be anyone's puppet, and his next move would send tremors through the monarchy's foundation. He stood in the chamber of truth, papers in hand, legacy in ruins. William, future king, loyal son, was finally forced to choose obedience or upheaval. As the SI lens stretched, so did the shadows of betrayal, and when he finally spoke, his voice didn't echo, it detonated. There had never been a moment in William's life where the weight of the crown had felt heavier. Not during his childhood, when cameras stalked every family outing. Not during his mother's funeral, when grief became a public performance. Not even during the many quiet crises the palace had survived behind closed doors. But now that the veil had been ripped away, and the full architecture of deceit lay bare before him, he felt its crushing gravity in every breath. The dossier had shattered more than the illusion of control. It had forced William to face a truth more disturbing than any scandal. His loyalty had been weaponized, and the very institution he was raised to protect had never protected him in return. As his father watched in silence, William's mind drifted back to a memory so vivid it felt like a wound. A conversation with Diana years ago, whispered in hushed tone, behind palace walls. "The truth," she had said, "is not dangerous. The silence is." At the time, he hadn't understood the weight of her words. Now, they roared in his ears like prophecy. Every carefully worded press statement, every staged appearance, every time he'd bitten his tongue in the name of unity, it had all been theatre. And behind the curtain stood those who had manipulated not only narratives but relationships, steering him like a figurehead on a ship. They refused to let him command. And then there was Kate. Her absence at the summit was a void that pulsed with unanswered questions. Was she told to stay away? Did she know what Charles planned to reveal? Or was she being shielded from the chaos erupting within the family she married into? Her silence wasn't just felt, it haunted the room. William had always leaned on her calm, her strength, but in this moment he was utterly alone. And perhaps that loneliness pushed him past the point of restraint. His voice, once measured, and diplomatic, now cracked with fury as he turned toward his father and the stunned advisors. "You let them twist my life into something I never agreed to," he said. "And you expect me to carry on as if none of it matters?" The room didn't respond. It couldn't. Charles, visibly shaken, stepped forward, his eyes pleading, not as a monarch, but as a father. "William, don't turn your back on this. On us. This crown still needs you." But the words fell flat, too late. Too hollow. The boy who had once stood obediently in the shadows of power was gone. In his place was a man done with obedience, done with pretense, and done with lies. "Then maybe the crown ends with me," he said coldly. Not as a threat, but as a declaration of truth. But William didn't walk away. He walked deeper into the shadows of a palace now collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. While Charles cracked and William burned, Camilla plotted. The woman once cast as a royal outsider now stood as its steeliest tact. Aishan. As king and son spiraled, Camilla summoned her own circle, and what she orchestrated next would reignite war within the palace walls. She moved quickly, methodically, like someone who'd spent years studying how to survive the storm rather than be swallowed by it. While Charles's emotional reckoning stripped the monarchy of its carefully tailored image, and William's rage threatened to tear it down entirely, Camilla remained composed, unshaken. She reached out to a select group of royal aides, those who had been in the game long enough to know how to erase a headline before it became history. In a secret meeting, she laid out her plan: contain the fallout, discredit the dossier, silence anyone who might corroborate its contents, and most crucially reclaim the royal narrative before the world declared the monarchy a failed institution. The orders were precise, her tone clinical. There would be no room for sentiment now, but even in the shadows, not everything stays hidden. Leaked. Text messages began surfacing, conversations from within Camilla's inner circle, laced with disdain for Charles's unraveling. "He's letting emotion destroy what took generations to protect," one message read. Another was more direct: "If he won't lead, someone must." The implication was clear. Camilla didn't just want to stabilize the monarchy, she wanted to steer it. Whether it was loyalty or ambition that drove her no longer mattered. In the vacuum of control left by Charles's confession and William's defiance, she moved like a queen without needing a crown. Then came the whispers, quiet, sharp, and unrelenting. Had Camilla been complicit all along? Was she part of the force that buried Diana's legacy to pave her own path to the throne? The very thought, once taboo, now danced freely through newsrooms and households alike. The timing was too neat, the patterns too similar. Camilla's history was being re-examined with new eyes, and for the first time in years she found herself not as the poised consort of a reformed monarchy, but as its most calculating survivor. But she hadn't lost her edge. In a move that stunned even those closest to her, Camilla contacted William directly. Her message was brief, its tone deceptively warm. She urged him to reconsider his stance for the sake of the crown, the country, and their family. "We need stability," she said. "This will tear us all apart." William read her message in silence, then replied with a single sentence that cut deeper than any royal scandal ever could. "You chose power. I choose truth." But in the game of crowns, truth alone isn't enough. What came next would force William to either rise or renounce it all. She had watched, waited, endured. But now, Kate Middleton could stay silent no longer. As the monarchy fractured, she emerged not as a dutiful duchess, but as a mother, a wife, and a woman with secrets of her own. What she revealed would turn the royal tide. Her silence had never been submission, it was strategy. While Charles and William tore open the seams of the institution in front of the world, Kate had been working behind the scenes, conducting her own quiet inquiry into the web of manipulation surrounding their lives. Away from flashing cameras and public engagements, she had been collecting her own truths, emails ignored, staff mysteriously reassigned, and briefings that shifted narratives without her knowledge or consent. For months, she'd remained still, watching the palace unravel from within. But when the lies reached her doorstep, when the line between protection and control blurred past recognition, she knew it was time to step out of the silence and into the storm. Her relationship with William had not been untouched by the chaos. They were a team, yes, but this crisis had exposed rifts between them that had long been buried beneath royal obligations. Behind closed doors, they disagreed, not about the existence of betrayal, but about how to respond to it. William wanted confrontation. Kate believed in exposure. The emotional toll was immense. Love strained by fear, trust shaken by the realization that their lives had been sculpted by unseen hands. She questioned everything, especially the institution she had married into. What had once seemed like a privilege now resembled a gilded prison. Privately, Kate had begun recording journal entries, spoken reflections never intended for public ears. But in the new era of royal reckoning, those recordings were leaked. In them, she spoke softly but powerfully of disillusionment, of watching her identity be repackaged for media consumption, of moments when she was portrayed not as herself, but as the palace's perfect counterweight to Meghan, a narrative designed to divide two women for the sake of control. She hadn't just seen it happen, she had lived it. And in those recordings, her heartbreak was unmistakable. Still, her message wasn't vengeance, it was clarity. She sent a personal note to Charles, now a fracture. "Dear Monarch, trying to reclaim moral ground." In it, she wrote, "You were right to speak, but truth needs action. Otherwise, it's just noise." It wasn't a challenge, it was a call to courage. And then came the moment no one expected. A video, years old, resurfaced online Kate, kneeling beside a young William, their fingers intertwined, as she whispered something that made him smile through tears. The footage went viral, not because of the setting, not because of the glamour, but because, in a world of choreographed appearances, it was raw, real, unscripted love in the middle of chaos. With Kate breaking her silence, the monarchy no longer had the luxury of denial. William was running out of time to make his final move. After weeks of silence, Prince William emerged before the cameras. The world held its breath. What he said next would redefine the monarchy, his family, and the future of the British crown. There would be no spin, no veil, no middle ground. Only a final, irreversible decisio. It was a silence that felt louder with every passing day. The public waited, the press speculated, and behind closed doors the palace braced itself. But when William finally stepped forward, it wasn't in the polished tones of a prince reading a script. It was in the voice of a man who had stood face to face with betrayal and walked out stronger. There was no entourage, no royal preamble, just truth, delivered with the force of someone who had nothing left to protect but his integrity. What came wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. He began not with blame but with clarity. He spoke of what he had seen, of the deception woven into palace tradition, of the manipulation masked as protection, and of the legacy that had been carefully sculpted not by truth but by fear. Then came the moment that shook the nation. William declared unequivocally that he would not accept the throne under the current system. The monarchy, as it stood, was unsalvageable. If it were to survive, it would have to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up. And if that wasn't possible, then so be it, he would walk away. Gasps rippled across the globe.
But William didn't flinch. He demanded the complete dissolution of the entity known as the Circle, the hidden power brokers who had shaped royal history from the shadows. He called for an independent investigation into the palace's operations, finances, and internal communications. This wasn't a gesture, it was an ultimatum. The monarchy would no longer be allowed to operate as a sacred institution above scrutiny. It would answer to the people it claimed to serve. And then, in a voice that cracked but never wavered, William revealed the heart of his decision: his children. "I won't pass down a legacy of lies," he said. "I won't ask them to carry a crown built on silence and sacrifice." He spoke not as a future king, but as a father, a man unwilling to allow the same cycle to repeat itself. The camera didn't blink, and neither did he. Behind the scenes, Charles watched his face, a mix of sorrow, admiration, and the pain of knowing that truth always comes at a cost. The father in him wept. The king in him understood. The reaction was immediate and seismic. Across the Commonwealth, leaders scrambled to respond. Some offered support, others expressed confusion, and a few began quiet conversations about their own futures with the crown. Social media exploded. The People's Prince trended within minutes. In London, outside royal residences, crowds gathered not to protest, but to listen, to stand witness to a moment that felt like history rewriting itself in real time. But William's decision didn't end the war, it exposed the next battlefield, where the monarchy itself would be on trial. The monarchy wasn't just under scrutiny, it was under siege. With William's declarati, on igniting global debate, Parliament, the media, and the public waged war over a question once unthinkable: does Britain still need a crown? And if so, who should wear it? The effect was instant. Within hours of William's seismic announcement, Parliament descended into chaos. Party lines blurred as members clashed over loyalty and legacy. Some MPs demanded immediate inquiries into royal finances, calling for audits that had been avoided for generations. Others insisted on a full investigation into the palace's historic relationship with the press, citing decades of alleged manipulation and narrative engineering. It was no longer a matter of tradition, it was a matter of accountability. And suddenly, what had once been whispered in the corridors of dissent became official business on the parliamentary floor. Outside Westminster, the streets of London swelled with noise and fury. Protesters lined the gates of Buckingham and Kensington, waving banners that told two different stories. One, read, "Truth over tradition, a call for reckoning, for transparency, for evolution." Another countered with, "Protect the crown," a desperate plea to preserve what little stability remained. And caught in the middle were millions of citizens watching history tear itself in two. The monarchy had always operated above the fray. Now it was the very centre of it. Amid the firestorm, William and Kate found themselves elevated by the very public they had once been moulded for. Their approval ratings soared, a surge of support not out of nostalgia, but because they had dared to break the pattern. They had refused the script, they had chosen truth. And the people responded. But not everyone rode that wave. Camilla's popularity cratered. Her calculated attempts to restore the institution's grip now appeared cynical in the face of raw honesty. Where William's silence once seemed like obedience, it now felt like resistance. Where Camilla's control once felt stabilizing, it now reeked of fear. Then, in an unexpected move that stunned even his closest advisors, Charles stepped back. No public appearances. No scheduled audiences. The king, who had once bared the truth, now seemed consumed by it. And yet, he re-emerged only once through a somber televised address. It was not a royal command, but a confession. He spoke not as a monarch, but as a man broken by the machinery he once upheld. He admitted his failure to protect his sons, to shield his wife, and to lead without fear. It was the most vulnerable the world had ever seen a sovereign, and it only deepened the fracture. Some saw courage, others saw collapse. Beyond Britain, the ripple turned tidal. In Canada, Australia, Jamaica, quiet talks grew into formal discussions. The Commonwealth was no longer united under a symbol, but divided by a question. Could the crown still serve them, or had it always served itself? The walls of the monarchy trembled under the weight of that reckoning. And for the first time in over a century, its very existence stood on trial not just in politics, but in public consciousness. And just as the nation teared on the edge, one final voice, unexpected and thunderous, entered the arena.